Undeniably, the world remains plagued by crisis and a host of enduring injustices owed to colonial power and domination.
In turn, countless revolutionary thinkers from times past and present have identified modernity as a point source of oppression.
When taking stock of the violent ways in which modernity was and continues to be forged, the Caribbean has been ground zero. That is the crucible of modernity.
As an intervention that centers the Caribbean, this season of Surviving Society will provide a window into several of the region's grassroots struggles for land, life, and liberation.
Do you want to read books that challenge capitalism and give you tools to fight back against oppression? Surviving Society is partnering with radical independent publisher Pluto Press to bring you books by exciting young authors, as well as classics by writers who defined our movements.
Throughout 2024, you can grab 50% off all books on their website by using the code SURVIVING50. Go to plutobooks.com to check out the books.
On today's episode, we were joined by Ray Alibey. Ray is pursuing a master's in applied psychology at the University of the West Indies. Alibey has worked on several research projects, namely the Sexual Culture of Justice Life Stories collection. Ray joins us to talk about their journey and the CAISO Wholeness and Justice program. Okay, welcome, Ray. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Levi and I are very happy to have you here. Firstly, I would like to ask you to tell us more about yourself, and specifically how you got into doing gender justice work.
First of all, let me say I'm so really excited to be here. I really am. I've never done a podcast before, and I'm feeling like, as we say, I'm like a bite of shilling. One thing about myself is that I am going to be very laid back. I'm not really academic, and I said don't think so. And when I speak about things or people, so I'm probably going to use a lot of local language. So if I need to at any point in time to explain myself, please indicate that I need to explain what a bite of shilling might actually be. So I like more to focus on the work that I do than on myself. I'm not really good at it's a skill I need to learn. Right? Some people already promote themselves very well. I'm not really good at that. I'll talk about how I got into HIV work and by extension a lot of genderqueer work and then into gender justice. It was a bit of a journey. I had a friend. Well, at first he was a friend. He was just a co-worker. He came actually looking for employment where I used to work, and I saw him as like, that guy is so gay. And it's a funny thing about queer people, you know, like you could be in a room full of queer people and somebody says, anybody in here gay? And nobody's gonna raise their hand. And so I asked him if he was gay, and he was like, no. I was like, all right. Some months later, we really started gel, we became friends, and he comes to me and he's crying. He was 21 then, I think, if not 19. And he's like, I have HIV. And at that moment, even though in my brain, it's by my frontal cortex there, I knew that the boy was not a walking disease. I just had to realize that I had some latent biases towards persons living with HIV. And he had no one else to talk to. And he would come to me every single day, and I used to be so sensitive about whether or not I know that you're not going to get HIV from sharing a glass or sharing a space, and yet still it bothered me. I never told him that. But what it did for me is that it made me I felt remorse. I didn't feel shame or guilt about it. I felt real deep remorse that I had to search myself in this way. So my idea was to really get into HIV work because I needed to do something to correct that. Now today, it doesn't bother me at all. If you have kids sleep on the same bed with me, I understand. I have come to that point of comfort. So I started working with Friends for Life, and I got a lot of education about HIV's preventive measures, or in particular, just how queer people are so vulnerable to the illness, not because of the type of sex that they have, but because of how they're situated in society and the kinds of psychological issues that they have to wrestle with. Moving on from there, I met Brandy. Brandy is like the one trans woman in Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, she's not, but she is just so iconic and has so embraced her identity and she lives that full life. I met Brandy, so Brandy was like, wow. I can't even think of Jan just being transgendered. I just see Brandy, I see her. It comes naturally. She is who she is. She's unabashed. She was, sorry, because she passed away like 2 years ago, but she's so real to me, and I'm still carrying with me. It's like almost as if she's right here with me. And as a person of trans experience, it was just me that has been a person of trans experience. It was just so empowering to see this woman in this very conservative and so-called religious space, just living her whole life. She wasn't half a person. She was dressed to the nines, walking around, and Brandy never, this is the thing about Brandy that I admired the most. She never gendered her voice. So she would be looking like Queen Elizabeth and speaking like Barry White. And it was not an issue. It was not an issue. You're laughing there, Johannah, because you know, Brandy, it was just, and that was just so empowering to me. And I started doing work with Brandy, and she started the Trans Coalition board in 2017. Brandy for years has been doing HIV work because she witnessed the kind of stigma and discrimination that was meted out to trans persons when they tried to access HIV healthcare. And she felt that she needed to do something about it. So she actually made, after doing the work 10, 20 years, it was she was doing this work helping persons who were trans get HIV healthcare and whatnot. She actually made a board and made it very formal. And she asked me to be on the board. This is the interesting thing. She wanted to make an entire trans board. And she's like, Ray, are you trans? I was like, no. She's like, oh gosh, Ray. I was like, okay, Brandy. It depends on how you really describing trans. And I was like, I don't think I am assigned female at birth. I'm very mass presenting. Like, you probably would not even think that I have any female parts or anything at all. But the thing about being trans is that the journey is so intimate and so individual for every person that I am not going to see myself either doing any kind of surgery or taking any kind of, what do you call this thing? Hormone replacement therapy. Believe me, I probably don't even need it. And of the need to be referred to as he or him. And in that time, that was how my concept of being trans was lodged. And she was like, come on, Ray. I said, so you want me to say I'm trans just so I can be on your board? I was like, okay, fine, I am trans. But then as I got more involved in trans work, I realized that there's no one way to be trans. In the same way, there's no one way to be gay or black or white or anything at all. And my personal journey of recognizing trans, I feel like going off topic here. You can stop me at any point in time you want to. I remember when I was in my teens, I was convinced I was a boy. It's like I couldn't figure out why the hell I just didn't have these matching parts. Like I'm sure I was a boy. And then I had my first menstrual cycle. I thought, oh, God damn it, this thing is for real. I am indeed female. And I made my own peace with that. I never felt like I needed to change my body in any way. And then it became another conversation for me because now I'm thinking about sexual orientation. And back then, I'm 50 years this year. So I'm talking about in my teens is way back when, really somewhere where we not even just about the time the postmodern era would have begun, somewhere in the 90s or there. And I was thinking to myself, well, I cannot like women because I'm not a man. So that in itself became another part of my journey into who I am and understanding myself. And Brandy was just like, she is a trans woman. She's a woman and she's into men. And there was no disparity or confusion in that thinking. And all of these things later on in my life actually began to make things so clear to me, being able to separate orientation from identity and recognizing that I don't have to change my name into Robert or have to take hormone therapy or bind or pack to be a person of trans experience. So I got on board with the trans board. As a director. Brandy passed away. The other director didn't want to do anything with the work, so I became the only director on the board, and I just couldn't let the work go because we work with my community is a very difficult community to work with. It's just a community that has been living with trauma in this space. I think the Caribbean on the whole is just a trauma space. And it has become like we're like fish in water, as I like to say. We don't even realize how we are surrounded by and how we are living in trauma and actually just doing these trauma responses. So Professor Roller would have talked about terminology. And in my mind, because I'm not into humanities, so I don't know much about how these fancy words about postmodernism and decolonization, all these things, how they really work in terms of academia. But when I think of Role talking about terminality as a part of the Caribbean experience, a part of being Trinidadian, this is what it comes like to me. I connected directly to being a queer person, being a trans person of trans experience, that the trauma is just so embedded in us. We don't even realize that our responses, our reactions, even when we're trying to initiate change, they're just rooted in trauma, and we just keep repeating the cycle of trauma because we don't realize that this is actually trauma. This is not. So we just have this whole terminology of doing the same thing, fighting against the same demons in the same way, just banging our heads against the wall, and then it just ends up into nothingness. So this work that I do with my people, the persons of trans experience, to me is very much like that. It's trauma-based, it's trauma-driven. It is difficult to get them to come together as a unified group, not fight against each other, to change the way they think about things, how they see the world, to get them into that space of deconstructing, because everyone is so embedded in living every day, wake up in trauma, living in trauma, then going to sleep in trauma.
A number of things, kind of came up in your response, like the product of the society, approach, as opposed to the self, that we cultivate when we learn, when we grow. In your first instance, and in terms of engaging with somebody who was living with HIV, and to think of that and where you are now and how much like your personal life experiences informs your work is just really, really amazing. I realized you didn't mention the fact that you're a MSc student. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but do you want to talk about that and share some of why you're pursuing postgraduate studies and what your focus is?
I really forget. I really forget that I'm an MSc student. It's part of my own personal trauma. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I'm an MSc student. I am way past being an MSc student. I'm at the point now where they just want me to give them their thesis and leave the university. So I have done I pretty much done all my thought courses in applied psychology. So let me talk a bit about that journey. So I am a Caribbean Black woman, person of trans experience. I identify as gay. And growing up, like I said, I'm 50 years this year. I did not have any way to understand. I was lost. I was just lost. I don't know how else to say it. I felt like the only person in Trinidad. I still have a really crappy gay radar, so I couldn't even look at someone and say, okay, that person could be my friend. And beyond that, I felt a lot of depression. Well, I know, looking back now, I know it was depression when my first girlfriend broke up with me. And for a very, very long time, I floundered. So I actually came into life very, very late. And when I was coming into life and I reflected on the things in the past that just had me in a doldrum, like just spinning up in mud, how do I say it? I was just in a state of nothingness and doing nothing. By that time, my youngest sister already had, she had an MBA already, and I had nothing more than just some very lame high school passes. And I thought about this time I need a career. I need to just get over this thing and start. I had a new family then, and I felt more grounded. And I thought about psychology. I was like, you know what? There are not enough Caribbean Black women, persons of trans experience, who could actually do psychological work or psychosocial work with persons like me, because it's just like, how many gay therapists do you really know? Far less with those in the Caribbean. The Caribbean is such a difficult space to define. So when we look at the whole setup, even when I look at my own discipline, and these theories are really Eurocentric theories based on observing from perhaps white middle-class persons, there is no representation of this melting pot that is Trinidad, or I'm not even going to expand to the rest of the region. This place that became a nation out of violence. It was, what David Rudder says, forward is the first word at the anthem, and that's where we have gone wrong. So how do they understand the kinds of trauma that is cultural to us, and in addition to which now becomes more complicated by the fact that we were a colonized nation and we imported a lot of their homophobia and transphobia into our own culture. And how do I get a therapist who's most likely going to be trained in Eurocentric concepts and ideas to understand that, what it really means to me to be queer and to have to wrestle with religion. It's not going to be the same way it's happening in North America or in Germany. It is something that is so essentially Trinidadian, that is part of our whole sexuality, but because it's part of it is informed by so many different things, informed by our ancestors, by the fact that we have experienced slavery and then a so-called emancipation, and we have all these colonial thoughts. All of these things are going on. All of these things that we are experiencing as a queer person, there was, in my mind, not enough Trinidadian therapists to address the needs of my population without first having to go study what it meant to be a colonial nation, what it meant to be enslaved, what it meant to be indentured labor. I have lived that. I have grown up in that. So when someone sits across from me and they are saying to me that they hate the fact that they are queer, that it is a sin, and that the family will disown them, and the things that happen in their life, they deserve it. That's why they can't get a good job, or their relations will never last. I don't have to wonder what they're saying or ask them to go somewhere on that, because I know that I have experienced that, and I know what it is to feel the effects of religious abuse in this particular, within that context of being queer in the Caribbean space. So I said, you know what? Stop complaining about it, go get your degree. So I went on to do psychology. I really wanted to do clinical psychology. Wonderful UE decided that they're going to push clinical psychology to a PhD degree. So the stepping stone to that was applied psychology. And even as I do applied psychology, which is predominantly heavily based in research, I still have had the benefit of practicing counseling psychology under the tutelage of Akila Riley Richardson, who is a medical social worker. And that is actually a position I hold working with Wholeness and Justice, which is an ambit of CAISO. But we're not here to talk about CAISO and Wholeness and Justice. So I do the work.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the specific approaches that you take with people that you come into contact either through Wholeness and Justice or through your work with 3TC? Because you talked about trauma-informed, you talked about, kind of like the approach that you have, based on your standpoint and your position and proximity with the queer community, as well as what I would describe as decolonial, theory and thought process. What does that look like in the field?
I could probably merge them together, because a lot of Wholeness and Justice, it's really two parts. One part is the legal aspect, where they're trying to push forward cases of human rights violations that are meted out to members of the queer community. I'm using queer as an umbrella term. To cover anybody who is not cisgendered, or not cisgender, to cover anyone who is not heterosexual. So any sort of human rights violations that they would have met, the wholeness part of the justice part of our work is centered around bringing forward those cases and pushing towards legislation change and bringing this litigation to address these resources. To address these violations, not just these funders always have us on some project where we have to record who got beaten up, who lost a job, and then the people tell the story, they relive the trauma, and we give them, I don't know, a $50 phone card or something, and thank you, bye-bye, and it's just recorded there and nothing happens with it. So we want to do something about it. So we do not want to hear your story about violence and oppression. We want to actually do something about it. So that's the justice part. The wholeness part is that we recognize that it is difficult. It is difficult on a good day. Hey, listen, with power, because power is so diffuse. But I'm looking here in the more structural way, without having class or being of the right. That must be a Freudian slip. Must not be of the right. Because we have colorism in Trinidad, of the right hue, for want of a better expression, or having being the right socioeconomic bracket, accessing justice for a cishet person is a challenge. Far more for someone who doesn't tick any of the quote unquote right boxes. So we offer this sort of clinical and psychosocial support to help them as they go through these cases. Because you go to court and you identify as a trans woman, the court is not going to refer to you as she or her. That is not a courtesy the court is going to give you. So you have to go there every day and deal with that dysphoria. So Wholeness is here to give you the kind of psychosocial support to spend the next 3 or 4 years understanding that not only the legal structure doesn't quite recognize you, but not everyone is going to have the capacity to say that, to respect your pronouns or to respect your identity. And you have to make peace with that. You cannot insist that other people, you can't insist, because you can't change people. You can change yourself, you can change your reactions. We're here to help you do that. Some people just would never have the capacity to do it. And it is hurtful. It is very hurtful. It is, so I'll take an example of a trans woman. You know, the fact that she has HIV, and she was never very consistent with her medication, and she would go to the hospital, and or always in the hospital, and she'd be there for some days, and that's where they force feed her the medicine, so she's getting better. You go see her, and then she has a shadow, and even though the nurses and doctors and attendants come and they would see that she eats and see that she has some meds or change her turn or whatever they need to do, no one really understands how upsetting that shadow is to a trans woman. So, and she can't do it for herself. So here comes Treaty C with a shaver to take off that shadow, to give that person some sense of humanity, to make them feel better in a way that the HIV meds could never do. That is just the way I'm pushing together wholeness and justice and Treaty C work here. What our work in wholeness and justice does for persons who are fighting with the system. They're not going to call you he if that's the pronoun you want. They're not going to call you she. They're not going to shave the beard off your face if you're a trans woman in a hospital. But I could help you come to terms with that, or make peace with that, or find ways to just what we call create psychological boundaries, so that you are protected from other people's phobias or hate or just plain lack of understanding.
So, I mean, you've given us insights into, some of the experiences that, people, constituents who you work with on a daily basis would experience. You talked about, the system, the judicial system, the medical system even, and how they would interact with persons of trans experience. So I guess what I want to know is what is happening within the trans community, in spite of those instances of gross neglect, but also blatant transphobia. What's been happening within the trans community? How are folks making the space for themselves, but also I guess resisting? Is that happening? And in what way?
I like that, I like that you asked how they're making space for themselves, because that is a huge part of what it is to be Trinidadian. We are all, each of us, trying to make space for ourselves. The identical calypsos, like the old one will say, send me back to Africa or send me back to India. I can't go because that's split me in half. Or the songs about Jihadi Bible talk about brotherhood between the ethnic groups and whatnot. Everybody is always trying to make space for themselves. And I will take here, Collins has this way, he says, share the nation. This is what we're doing, that there is enough space for trans people to exist, to live, to have full lives alongside Christian people, alongside even the transphobes and the homophobes. It is possible that all of us, with our various identities and all our nuances, we could actually find space here. And that has been a struggle ever since emancipation. I'm going to get all academic now. I always remember Lord Harris saying that the people have been freed, but a society has not yet been formed. And that is one of the, to me, that's one of the most grievous errors of good old Mother England. You set these people free and they have absolutely no tools to understand what it is to have community, to build a society, and they just flounder. And then here we are, how many years later? I think it's 150 years, I can't remember. No? We're still trying to find space, trying to find identity. And we have a group of people here who before were not even recognized, because I don't think the idea of being trans or the concept or recognize that there is such a thing as a trans identity didn't come around until, I don't know, maybe the 2000s or something. So, because back then you were a drag queen, you dress up, you dressing a shim, you're dressing up like a woman or something like that. So I love that you talk about space, but that's what we're doing as trans persons or persons of trans experience, especially younger ones like Trans NBTT. That's another we call them again another organization. They are showing up and saying this, I am here, and they're trying to make space for themselves, just like everybody else trying to make space in this little island, twin island. So in terms of what are we doing as trans people, the very first thing I say we were doing is just recognizing, this is to me the most powerful thing, probably something Brandy gave to us, that we are not half a being. We are a whole. We are actually a whole that exists to live a life and not half a life. So why can't I dress the way I want to dress, as I see myself and perceive myself, and go to work? That was Zoe Zazel's issue with TTT, because she would dress as she sees herself as a woman, and they find she should come in there with a suit and a tie. And that was a whole story, and she ended up not working with them anymore. But that is the way we resist. You lost your job, but you resisted, and now it's something that somebody else could pick up that mark, and we can move forward to be kind to come out with a workplace policy. They didn't have that there when Zoe was fighting up to wear her little dress to go to work. But as we move along, these are the things that are happening because we expand in that space. And I guess it's part of the postmodern movement as well, where we go beyond. So when I think, I bring that into humanities, but when I think or conceptualize the modernity, this was the title of this thing, something about modernity,
the crucible.
The crucible of modernity. Right. I think about modernity happening in the 70s. You had peace and love. We're different, but we could accept each other, burn your bra. It was all of this activism taking place. And then as we got more postmodern, as we we need to put these things into law. We need to kind of guarantee these rights. It can't just be burning your bra and talking about love and driving a Scooby-Doo van. And so now this is where we are. We are like, so we then lost our work. Another person also had to leave their job, and because they wouldn't allow him to dress as he wanted. He had to come in dresses and skirts. And now we have KAISO with this workplace policy, and we go around, what KAISO does, go around doing these training sessions with organizations and businesses, and we're talking about diversity and how we could include trans persons and their identities into the space of work. The world has become globalized, as it were, and the need for diversity is even more necessary now. So you need trans people sitting there in your boardroom, because they're going to see things from a perspective that the success won't see it from. And you want to grab that next customer, because we're all capitalists and we're greedy and grabbing. We have this whole concept of scarcity that we have to, if they have, then we don't have. So we want to take from, how can you do that if you have all these blind spots? So now we have this movement towards diversifying the workspace, recognizing that trans people could show up as they are, have a whole life. It's a little bit slow because we have a lot of trans persons who, unfortunately, because of who they are, have to do sex work. They're lost early in the system from the schools because of the bullying that takes place. Because there's a resistance yet in Trinidad from the powers that be to recognize that there are other identities, to validate other identities. But the push continues. So we having this kind of change in Trinidad in terms of trans people, where I remember one senator, I think it was Senator Brown, I can't remember her name, so let me not misquote. One of the senators in the parliament, she was like, oh gosh, the trans people are here, or they know when they pass Europe at a certain time in the night, who they will see in skirt and heels. So that conversation taking place in Parliament is, even if it was shut down, it is still something to be celebrated, because here we have someone who has some power and autonomy actually recognizing and saying that these people exist. In terms of finding that space or embracing a full life, trans people will say, look, Ray, I really don't want to do this work anymore. Help me find something else, somewhere where I can go. There are lots of things I could go do. They're very creative people, whether it's doing hair or making bath or body washes, but to get people to actually invest in them as people is a bit of a challenge. But the idea that they recognize now that they could actually do something other than sex work, or dream, even just to dream of doing something other than sex work, to me is the most powerful way in which trans people right now in Trinidad are claiming their space and claiming their identities.
I'm currently in Liverpool in England, and the UK is oftentimes referred to by frontline activists fighting for justice here as grim turf island, these sorts of things, in so much as that there is a very potent and hostile groundswell of transphobia that exists in the UK. I mean, it's the unfortunate reality is that I don't think any of these respective islands that we're on have an exclusive hold on transphobia. But Ray, you're also talking about, making interventions into alienation, as well as into the ways in which trans and queer folks have been dehumanized by historical and contemporary forces in a lot of different ways. And then having to deal with the trauma, the lasting traumas of that. You had earlier mentioned or referenced someone with a shadow. And I'm wondering if you could maybe expand upon that. It seems like that maybe is dealing with some degree of internalized depression or the psychological impacts of transphobia or hostilities oriented towards queer folks. So I'm wondering maybe if you could elaborate a bit on when you're referring to people carrying shadows or having to overcome those traumas, what are you getting at with those references? As well as in relation to maybe a bit more details on that, if you could maybe expand also on some of the point sources of transphobia, or what are some of what lies at the roots of these respectability politics that are dehumanizing and alienating certain groups. So a couple of different things maybe to address there.
Okay, so first of all, it was a wonderful question. Thank you. I'm smiling here because I'm thinking how to bite this. So when I was speaking, first of all, when I was speaking of the shadow, I was speaking of when the beard begins to grow back on the man's face, that shadow. But you're quite right. When I think shadow is such a beautiful word to use to explain how trauma is dissolved into trans identity and who trans experience. So yes, I was talking about the fact that they were given care, but they were not understanding that part of this person's need for psychological care is to not be lying on a bed there looking more masculine when they identify as woman. And that in itself is a shadow in the figurative way that you had first, but I think you had first understood it to be, because now you have to wrestle this individual, let me tell you, this is a real story about real people. Grew up in an orphanage, is barely literate, has done sex work all her life, and very talented at making jewelry, by the way. It was so ironic that we actually tried to get a grant from social services to give her startup money to buy some machinery so that she could make and clean jewelry, but that's what she's really, really, really good at. And these people sat down there with their colonial and totally, I don't know what word to use, selves, and said she doesn't need the machinery to go and make jewelry and become self-sufficient and stop doing sex work and putting herself and others more at risk. What she needs to do is go learn to read. So they come with this great idea that no, we're not going to give you the money to get the machine, but we're going to send you to read. That is just so colonial, this thinking. And we're going to send you in one of the worst areas possible for a trans person to go, because it was in this very what do you call it? Like these urban areas where you have these probably referred to as inner city areas, where you have these types of urban youth. I don't know. I'm trying to find a polite way to say the kinds of thinking that would exist in this space. The point is that if she goes there as she is, they're probably going to kill her. Like, seriously, how disconnected could leadership and those who have been entrusted with our duty bearers, that's the only word I could find, in terms of looking at this human person. You have created a next shadow. There's no way she could go there and get learn to read. And the thing, so you have put her back into this space where she has to do the sex work, where she thinks that she's not even, this is the beauty of Caribbean people, they're always in some sort of idea about some zombie and some supernatural being doing something to them, where she thinks she doesn't even have HIV, that somebody make her sick or put some bad spirit on her. And she cannot read, but in her purse she carries a bunch of the Bible, must be a Quran. You will find Jehovah's Witness literature for someone who cannot read. And they're living in this space where they don't understand. She doesn't understand her own illness. She is in fear now. She doesn't even want to travel to go on the streets again because she has been attacked by people, because she's very small in structure and size. She's afraid of just leaving her house to go and even hustle on the streets. So she just has clients coming home, which in itself is a great risk. That's another challenge. Someone can come home there and kill you. It has happened before. And this person is living this life that is really in shadows, because you are living almost as if you're in a house and all the windows are closed, because you don't understand, you have no knowledge about your illness and how to take care of yourself. You're caught in this vortex of doing this terrible work that they relegate trans persons to just doing meaningless jobs or jobs that are far from the formal economy. You don't have a space or language to talk about who you are and explain what it is you feel about yourself, because it is just a huge shadow. It is just trauma upon trauma upon trauma, because you would have grown up in an orphanage, you'd have been identified or singled out as being different than other, you would have been picked on, you would have had a dusty time. When you come out into adult life, and in adult life you have no real skills to do anything other than sex work, once again you're put in a position where you are pushed into darkness again. That's exactly where you're working, in darkness anyways. And it just follows your life. And I don't know, to me it is almost so sad that this is the whole sum of an individual's life, just relegated to the shadows of society. You're not even on the fringe or the margin, you're literally living in the shadows. So you want to find trans persons, you have to look for them in dark spaces. Every day they wake up feeling, I remember a trans woman said to me that when I go out on the street, I feel, quote unquote, like a criminal. So she dresses, imagine you as a human being in your own country, you get up and you're going to just buy a loaf of bread at the grocery, and the act of opening your front door and walking to that grocery is an act of criminality. I cannot, shadow, thank you so much. That is the best word to describe what it means to exist in that space, in that psychological space. And I'll be using that in the future, if you don't mind. I love it. I love it. So in terms of transphobia and how that has come about, this respectability politics, I'm going to go right back to good old Mother England. When the colonizers, first ones have probably been like Spaniards, when they came here, they found gender fluid people. The indigenous persons were gender fluid. Even if you look into the African pantheon of Orishas, you would find that there's a gender fluid god there as well. Even within the, I'm going to mention African, I'm going to mention Indian as the two dominant ethnic groups in Trinidad. There's also that representation of gender fluidity within the culture. Actually, there's nothing in Hinduism to say a bad word about homosexuality. But when they came here, they took that from us. That is part of what they, of imposing their culture on us, and how it ruptured who we are as people, and how we were connected to our own senses of being, shadow and trauma again, that we rejected, we lost this understanding that it was okay to be gender fluid, it was okay to have a third identity, it was okay to be homosexual. they came and they just totally disrupt that for their own purposes and needed people to breed. So they could have more people producers on the sugarcane and what do you call it? The cigarette, the tobacco, that's the word, and the tobacco plantations. And of course, they thought of themselves as being superior anyway. So their culture and their ideas and their concepts became the touchstone that everyone else had to live up to. So, we had to speak a particular way, dress a particular way. And there's no way in that space to be trans or to be queer or to be a feminine man or a masculine woman, even if you weren't trans or queer. So that transphobia is something that exists in our, I can give some psychology here, in our limbic systems, in our emotional way of knowing. So we don't even know at which point in time we became transphobic. We don't even know at which point in time we became homophobic. We just know that we are. That's wrong. We don't know why, but it's wrong. And it's a movement now to get people, even people who are queer, it's wrong. In their emotional knowing, it is wrong. It's a movement now to get them from there to deconstruct that, to decolonize, to separate from these ideas of the colonial masters and look at ourselves and see ourselves as, okay, so I am queer. It is not wrong. That was something imported by Princess Margaret or one of those Victorian people who were into, what do you call the boy? All this conservatism, whatever you may call it. I think Jamaica is a prime example of how homophobia has really impacted and been violent to its own people. So yeah, that's where I think this transphobia and stuff is rooted. It's in a history of knowing, of not knowing. Knowing of not knowing. What I mean by that is that by the time a person becomes transphobic or homophobic, they cannot tell you, well, this is the point in time. There would have been just these subtle messages that they would have been receiving as children growing up that they believe to be right and true. Don't cry, boys, don't cry. Girls need to sit quietly and close the legs, whatever the case may be. Closing legs is a big thing across here. I don't know why. And so anything outside of that binary threatens that sense of identity. And so I think more than being homosexual or queer or gay or whatever language you want to use, being trans really, really, really disrupts that binary and that way of knowing that things are ordered and they're specific, that, a man is a man, a woman is a woman. I mean, some years ago, a Calypsonian sang about it had no in between, either a king or a queen. Utter rubbish. So seeing somebody trans, someone like me or someone like Brandy, totally disrupts that. And when we as human beings come together with something we're not sure about, certain about, it's a knee-jerk reaction to just go towards what we feel comfortable and safe with, which is the binary, and lash out in fear. But people won't sit with that discomfort long enough to get to really tease that out. Whew, and that's just a bit of my idea on that. So
I'm wondering too, just in relation to thinking about the Caribbean or the quote unquote so-called third world, oftentimes from an uncritical as well as very problematic perspective, international researchers will cast these things in very limited and reductive terms as being unsafe. Well, that's where buggery laws exist. That's where it's wildly homophobic. It's unsafe. But you've also mentioned the ways in which there's movements emerging, as well as then too how historically there's always been challenges to the imposition of these binaries and very essentialist ways of being to colonial respectability politics. So I'm wondering, in keeping in mind sort of these very unfair and essentialist critiques of the purported third world, so to speak, is a dangerous, unsafe for trans people, for queer people, which that's not to minimize the degree to which there are challenges. But then too, I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on the movements and the forms of political agency and resistance that are emerging within the Caribbean, maybe even in Trinidad and Tobago, with respect to collective direct action for trying to change some of those things. You had very much mentioned the ways in which trans and queer people, just by their very existence or presence in the face of colonial respectability politics, are posing a challenge or disrupting or unsettling or rupturing some of those very limited ways of thinking. So what are some of the forms of resistance, political agency, and even movement building that are taking place in the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago with respect to challenging these oppressive forces?
You asked this beautiful question, and I am going to sum this up, I think, in the only way that perhaps my colleagues here at Adaeze and Johannah would probably get it. I have one word for you: carnival. Carnival, carnival, carnival. That is the seat of resistance. You cannot be a West Indian, Caribbean, a Trinidadian person and your whole life has been resistance to slavery, resistance to indentureship, resistance to Eurocentric thinking. We are a people of resistance. We are born in a revolutionary space. We are born to resist. That's how all we have been doing for years and years and years. When I look at Carnival, and you talk about Trinidad being an unsafe place, these people who are casting Trinidad as an unsafe place because we have anti-burglary laws or we have transphobic attitudes, they need to come out on a Juve morning and see just how safe it is to see a man whining on a man or a woman whining on a woman. Ain't nobody looking to get beat up, flogged, locked up, or nothing at all. They have to come out in this space and see the way that we have. You see, the Juve thing, the whole carnival thing was really a European thing, eh? And there's just a way in which our ancestors took that from them and really revolutionized it and created a space for just any kind of identity to exist. So yes, we would like to be more safe. We would like to have some hate crime laws. We would like to have some laws that would recognize that I should be able to go to work comfortably in a tuxedo or a three-piece suit and not be told that I need to go back home and put on a dress and a high heel shoe. Or likewise, Zoe could come in her dress and have to wear a three-piece suit. Yes, we need these things. Yes, we don't have. I think a lot of it too is the way in which this is a challenge for the Caribbean. The global north. I am going to call them first world countries. That's just a title they put on themselves, a construct. And we are not third world countries. Because you say we're third world, no, you could get us there, but we are not a third world country. That's your construct. They have their own markers of what it is to have family, of what it is to be respectable, of what it is to be man or what it is to be woman. And we are in this space and we have traveled that from day one. From day one, we had women going out and working to support men because when they were emancipated, men couldn't find work anyway because the masters wanted them back on the plantation, so they wouldn't hire them to do anything else. So the women were the ones. That in itself is a resistance. When McGill Diva dress up and put on her dress and jumps in a taxi to travel up the road to go to get see her doctor's appointment from a whole 30 or 40 kilometers from where she lives, just doing that is an act of resistance. And she could do that, and maybe somebody will make a nasty comment. Maybe somebody might, or somebody, so people usually sing it in groups, might want to throw a stone or say something awful at her. But she's going to get up to that place anyway, even if she's wounded or not. God forbid that she's not harmed in a very fatally. And that's what they do. That is amazing that trans people every day, in spite of the fact that they feel so diminished and may feel it, they do exercise their own power and agency. And the thing is that they don't see it. That's what makes my community difficult to work with. They don't realize that I remember when Brandy was now coming into herself, she would put, we don't have access. We don't have access to healthcare the way trans people would have in the global north. So you ain't gonna get that hormone therapy to get the boobs to grow and whatnot. What the hell with that, Brandy? Was full to you call this thing balloons with water and put that up. I remember when one of them bursts on the street and all they get wet. But all that is part of it, all that is part of embracing. That is an act of resistance. That's a part of carving your space. So what it was, go for the next balloon and fill it up, and they keep on pressing. And we find ways to protect ourselves. So I'll give you a next story about the said Brandy. Brandy was at a place they call Hawk and Spit. It was one of them real Z-grade, low kind of little bars. And she was standing there doing her own thing. And this man was with there, there's a man, there's a man, there's a man. And Brandy used to carry a rock in her purse. But just in case anybody wanted to attack her. And he did go like, that's a man, that's a man. And Brandy take up that purse and swing it and give that man one lash on his head with that well, he stuttered, he stopped. Well, he got a little bit dazed, but he stopped saying that's a man though. So we find ways, even in all this unsafeness, to protect ourselves and each other. And this is the protection part. Another member of the community, the Brandy don't walk around with no stone in the thing to go and kill anybody. Here's a hammer. I don't see how that was better, but here is a hammer. So we come together and we understand our risks, we understand our challenges, and we find as a community our own solutions. So yes, it is unsafe. Yes, we need better protections, but we're not at the mercy of the haters.
Ray, as you're talking and mentioning your work in terms of who you're engaging with, as well as then to what you're up against in a variety of different ways, one thing being history, of course, but then also to these everyday challenges that you're mentioning, I'm wondering just what is your source of motivation in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances that won't be impossible because of the different types of agency and forms of resistance that you've identified, but yourself personally, in terms of the work that you're doing, the causes that you've devoted yourself to, what's your source of motivation, as well as into what instills within you a sense of hope about things getting better?
Well, for one, to do this kind of work, you just have to be optimistic. You have not a choice but to be optimistic. Otherwise, you would not get up every day and do this work. But beyond that, I will unabashedly say I am a wounded healer. I do struggle with depression. I don't know to say struggle. I cope with depression. Struggle was for back then. Now I'm coping with it. And that was born out of not having what I am today to other people. So I don't want anyone else to spend the best years of their youthful lives from 20 to 35 or 40, more like from 20 to 40, just depressed and floundering around because there's no one there to understand you, to see you, to witness you. So it means something to me, even in my worst days, because there are days, let me tell you, and depression is real. You don't want to take that next call and hear somebody else's drama and story. But the thought of the 20 years of my wasted life, but maybe it wasn't me. Maybe I'll get to a point where I wouldn't see it as wasted because I just felt so alone and not having family and understanding that there's a thing called family of choice, that you don't need family of origin. What you could have is a family of choice, a chosen family, and not having that. I don't want anybody else in this year of our Lord 2023 to be going through that. That was something that belonged in the 1980s and 1990s. That is my motivation. It is a way I am silencing my own lamb by doing this work.
I did want to ask about a term that you used, which was religious abuse. And also was thinking through when you mentioned carnival and, in terms of like, I guess the different rituals that we have and how they, how these rituals like affect the everyday life of someone of the trans experience. And then like to ask, like, are there rituals that people of trans experience have cultivated for themselves? Like, are there any of like cultural things that are specific to the Caribbean trans community or maybe the Trinidad trans community that you want to tell us about? Yes,
I can share it with you. I love that. I can share it with you. So back in this is because I'm taking from the little script they give me here about modernity and thing, right? So back in that age of modernity in the 70s, where they had all these civil rights movements and stuff, Black Power movement was a thing here in Trinidad. All this sense of consciousness and coming into your own and grabbing your own identity and severing from Mother England and all of that. Trans people used to congregate in Woodford Square. The irony. And there are two fountains in Woodford Square. There's a big one in the center, and then there's a little one that was more like the Lyman Center. So there was a way, like I said, back then, these folks that would not have identified as trans, they probably consider themselves dress-up girls or I don't know, dress up sex workers, or I don't know what term they would have used. Drag queen was really the umbrella term, because I even remember anytime I saw someone who was of trans experience, I'd be, oh, that's a drag queen. The concept of women being like drag queens never even existed, strangely enough. So in this space, these trans persons would congregate at night, of course, to do some sex work. If they get a little hustle, they get a little hustle. And what I thought, one of the things I liked about it is that if you were a minor underage, they would actually beat you and send you back home. You're not old enough to be here yet. But come today, you're 18 or 21 years of age, and they go back into the park and they see you, and you're now of age to be with them, to do the sex work, to become part of this community. They would pick you up and dump you into the whole fountain. Back then, the fountain had water. Right now, I think it's dry. Back then was a nice working fountain, and there's lots of water. So they will actually pick up and you will get a complete baptism. Not just wet your head, they will throw you into the fountain, and then they'll make up a name for you. I guess pretty much the way deaf people look at characteristics and pick a name, they will just pick a name for you. So they pick you up and your name was Dion or Devon. And when they fling you in there, they say, from today, here's Erica. That is it. Whether you like Erica or not, from today, after you get soaked in that fountain, you are Erica. And that to me was just so significant in a time of where people were finding identity outside of what was assigned to them by colonial masters. I'm talking about the Black Rights Movement here, the Black Power movement in Trinidad. And you have this group of people who are just beyond just taking up a name and saying, well, they call me Erica from here, from now on, Erica. They had a whole ritual that is symbolic and seals this whole thing, that makes it so real and so poignant. They don't do it anymore, but probably one because the fountain had no more water, God knows since when. But there are different ways. Oh, then you'll find at that point in time, you'll find like what you'll call like a mother. So that person would so there you come out there now, you're 21, you could line with them, they meet and send you home. Adaeze must be mother of everybody, must even run you and all. Adaeze could become your mother and will teach you, I guess, how to be safe, but back then safe sex wasn't the issue, yeah. So that is the way it has changed. You ain't gonna get dumped in a a fountain again to find a house mother and get a new name and identity. Now you can actually get your own name and identity right away. You don't have to wait for someone to give it to you. If you decide that this is who I am not John, I am Janice, and you come on the road and hey, I am Janice. All right, fine, no problem, Janice. You could go one step further. Hey, you know what? Ray, you talk to Ray can help you get with Wholes and Justice, and you can actually do a deep pull and really change your name to Janice and get ID card saying Janice. But what they would do, they would find someone on the block, and that person would become. So I remember one of the sex workers I used to talk with, and not all of the trans persons on the block are actually trans people, and probably would just dress up for the purpose of making money that night. As I said, there are different ways to be trans. And she said to me, when I got on the block, at that time HIV was the thing. It was rampant. They pulled me aside and they taught me, because Caribbean parents don't talk about cishet sex, far less than any kind of other sex. So you ain't getting no sex education outside what nonsense people talking about under a lamppost somewhere. But they would take her aside and they would teach her about the need to use condoms, have protected sex. And if somebody ended up sick, as they would say, well, then you have people like Brandy and Cyrus, these stalwarts in our community, who would see to, they ain't gonna shush you about you behind your back and say, well, she's checking, she's sexy, everyone. They will actually take you to get tested, take you to get your meds. When they get sick, they'll stay with you. As a matter of fact, that is how Friends for Life came to be Friends for Life. Somebody gets sick, they ain't seen them on the block for a while. When they decide to go see them, it's because the person dead. And it's like, sometimes, and most of the time, the families don't even want them home, so they die in the hospital, or they come home and they just like, and we lost one, believe it or not, this was something in the early 1990s. They would stick in a room somewhere and they just whittle away there. And just about 2 years ago, we lost a young boy. I think he was 20. If he was 25, he was plenty. Lost him the same way. The family just stick him in a room there. And it was the friends who decided that it would be his friend for life that would come to his space and change his bedding, change his clothes, bathe him. He eventually passed away because there's really these people come in for a time, your family's there with you and they're ignoring you. So that is the way in which the baptism and the ritual of the fountain no longer exists. But you're going to find yourself someone who's going to mentor you into taking care of yourself. It's really health driven right now. I think we're moving into that space now with 3TC, where we're given that psychosocial support, where you don't have to wrestle with the fact that you're not man enough. So I have a client who's like, his thing is that he's not man enough. But he can be any more masculine if he tried. I don't know what he's trying to be masculine about. And he wrestles with that if he were man enough, then things wouldn't be this way in his life. Get into that space where you could actually, the actual self that you have and it's self that you envision to be could actually be married together and be, symmetrical. Symmetrical is what I want. A lot of the stress and trauma and the shadowing of trans lives comes from trans persons in their lives, is that incongruity between who I am and who other people expect me to be, what my parents expect me to be, what society expects me to be, what religion expects me to be. And as a point of departure, I'll talk about religious abuse. People here still exercise the children, figuring that this is some demon, some succubus. If it's a woman, it's a succubus. It's like, no, if it's a gay person, then a man, then it's a succubus. If it's a gay woman, then it's an incubus. I don't know how they come up with these narratives. They actually believe these sex demons actually inhabit the children and they need to go exorcise them. And it's just so traumatic. I could speak of this. I mean, there are different ways in which people experience religious abuse. I remember they used to beat her and cut her as a young Hindu woman. And the irony there, really and truly, coming back to colonialism, I'm going to blame them to the end. Hinduism has not a bad word to say about homosexuality, whether it's between men, women, groups of men and groups of women. And yet still, this very Hindu family is punishing their daughter because she is a lesbian by beating her and cutting her because they want to get the demon out. Where you get that from, if not from some Christians, some Judo-Christian centered sort of ideology? It is not part of. This is the disconnection we experience where we're always shoving and trying to find space and to find identity. That has nothing to do with who you are and who your ancestors are, but they're busy punishing the child there because somewhere in the infusion of Christian thought, of Eurocentric thought, has usurped what would have been natural for you. I talk about myself. My mother suddenly decided she got to be a born-again Christian. In my personal opinion, that's the worst thing to be. But that is my personal opinion. It's not a representation of 3TC, Holiness and Justice, okay, so. But I didn't really come out because, as I said, back then, it's like you get dragged out. You don't have the option to come out of the closet and, say, Mom, Dad, I'm gay, whatever. Somebody sees something, hears something, knows something, and hey, I see so and so go on. And that's pretty much how I was outed. And I remember one day she simply says, I'm going to take you somewhere. Oh, God, Lord. First of all, there was always to have to go to these church meetings. And wear a skirt. And listen to people talk about just how bad a homosexual is. It was reversed, seriously. And then she took me to this place to see this. I want to use such derogatory terms, but I would use what they call here, academic something. What's it called? Academic tone. And just say, I went to this place at a convent where this minister, maybe a lay minister or young priest, exorcised me. Yeah, right. Well, I wish back then I was not so depressed and traumatized. I would have given him a goddamn exorcism. He would have had a demon to deal with, and he would have to go back and read his books. I should have been screaming and foughting and giving him something to be afraid of. But anyways, I guess the demon never left. He's still here. And the worst part of it was that she would come in at night and put oil on my head and my foot, like, no man, I'm sleeping. Why are you here doing this stupidity and praying over me? Lord have mercy. Parents still do that this day to their children. And that I could endure. Going to hear these idiotic pastors, sorry for loss of academic tone there, going to these places to hear these pastors talk about the evils of homosexuality, I could endure that. What I couldn't endure was this. If I am upset or angry because the situation is frustrating to me, and back then I couldn't see my girlfriend when I wanted. It was a whole everybody on there was like police. I'm angry. That is because the demon know that they know, and the exorcism working, and it resisting coming out. So you're angry. And if I was just too exhausted to fight anymore, the demon trying to be smart now. He trying to pretend that he's not there anymore. I had no room for human expression. Seriously, could you imagine? You cannot get angry and you cannot get sad and withdrawn. I guess what I was supposed to be was happy and, I don't know, accommodating. But I had nothing to be happy about. It was a stressful situation. I couldn't see my girlfriend when I want. I had to deal with all this trauma at home. I wasn't working, so I had no financial agency. But that to me was the worst part of it. But that very essential part of my emotional being of I couldn't be angry, I couldn't be sad, I couldn't be quiet. It was all tied into this ludicrous concept of demonism and exorcism. So yes, religious abuse. I personally think if you talk to your children before they're 21 about any kind of religion, you're abusing that child. I don't care if it's Buddhism, well, not Buddhism, because people come to Buddhism, but this expansiveness of the Judeo-Christian religion, this way of converting and bring up children in the faith before they could even begin to deconstruct, analyze, or think about what it means. You have already done what we call that emotional learning and embedded that thing in them that they cannot begin to analyze and critique in any meaningful way. To me, it's a form of religious abuse. You talk about children about religion and indoctrinate them in Catholicism, Anglicanism, whatever case. We do that, do it when they're 21 and see how far it will go. See how far it will go if you're 21 and you actually tell your child, listen, we are human beings today because a supernatural being actually picked up some dirt, spat into the dirt and made us. You tell a 21-year-old person that. So that's just to me what I mean by religious abuse. And I say this and I disclaim Treaty C, Wholesome Justice and Kaiser. This is just Ray's own opinion about the ways in which religious abuse is meted out to my community members.
The way that, Christian religion, specifically like the Roman Catholic Archdiocese, the Holy See, all of these things intervene in the political system and block policies and, legislative changes towards inclusion of the LGBT community. It's very... I think it makes sense to kind of think, in that way, because there's the human mind, shaping the human mind. They're also shaping the policy and creating an exclusive situation. I'm seeing Levi's hand up.
Well, Ray, when you're telling these confounding stories that are slice of life, but also loaded with political and historical implications, I couldn't help but think, particularly that in that one instance when you were saying, no matter what you felt, you were going to be, you were damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah.
Very much so in the way that Fanon would talk about. This is what colonial liberal modernity has imposed upon different groups all throughout the Caribbean, all throughout Africa, all throughout Latin America. They're condemned, and they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. Black realities, indigenous groups, queer, trans realities, as well as into the contemporary manifestation of being made and seen as wretched or as an abomination, or these forms of dehumanization that you're talking about, which are ludicrous, as you pointed out so eloquently, to think about. Tell someone who's 21 that's got a bit of life experience underneath their belt that they've been possessed by a demon, and that's why they love someone who looks different than what might be most common with respect to what's on television, these sorts of things. Anyway, I couldn't help but think of the ways also that sort of condemnation or being damned is operating. And this is something revolutionary Caribbean thinkers as well as anti-colonial thinkers have been talking about for generations, but also too very much at the heart of your work. It's sort of how do you respond and strike back against those forces that are damning people, these sorts of things. As well as in too, I really appreciated the ways in which these very oppressive religious forces and institutions, they're quite rigid in their thinking and the way in which they're imposing and inculcating people into particular ways of being. But then in the Caribbean, you'll find these instances of baptism being queered the way that you were talking about.
Yes. Never
So
saw
anyway,
it. I love that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to intervene and sort of say how much I appreciated everything that you were sort of talking about, as well as then too, you can certainly get a sense of why you're motivated to do the forms of resistance work that you're doing.
Thank you. I like how I didn't realize that we really did queer baptism. Oh yes, it's about finding space, negotiation space. I love it. So thank you for that insight. Shadows and the baptism, queer baptisms. I love it.
So now we've come time for the fun little segment. It's called Radical Knowledge Beyond the Pod. Essentially, I'm going to ask you some questions and you're not going to have a lot of time to respond, but you just basically respond to the questions really quickly and it's going to kind of go by. Yes. So, I'm going to start us off with the first question. What is your favorite quote? Who is it from and why?
One of my favorite quotes is definitely from Chinua Achebe. We are the arrow, and that God is the bowmaster. But somewhere along the line, I can't remember exactly quote, but this is somewhere along the line, we are, and he's talking about religious people. They're no longer at the arrow, just going at the will or the aim of the bowmaster, but they have themselves have become the bowmasters. And I always thought that was really powerful in the way that instead of being a servant of something, you have usurped or contaminated that very particular post or office or responsibility and just manipulate into something of your own political will and doing. So the other one is salt. And I remember this one. They had eaten salt and had gotten too heavy to fly. And I'll leave it there because I know I don't have much. I love that quote by Earl Lovelace in the book that he wrote, Salt.
Called Salt.
They've gotten heavy. So there's the idea that because the Africans ate salt, they no longer would. I think the idea in the book was that there's a story that he was telling that when the first set of enslaved persons came, one of them found his freedom. He never ate the salt of the food that was given to him by the colonial masters, the enslaved masters, But he was able to one day go on some mountaintop and he flew back home to Africa but everyone else had eaten salt and they in turn was stuck here on this island as enslaved persons because they had eaten the salt and had gotten too heavy to fly.
Wow. Okay, so those are two amazing books by two amazing authors, Chinua Achebe and Earl Lovelace. So thank you for that. The second question, Levi, do you want to ask? Do you want to do the switcheroo thing?
It's my favorite question, so
yes.
I'll happily.
Okay.
Well, one of them, I don't want to create a hierarchy of questions as we're opposed to hierarchies, but I do have an affinity for this one. Ray, question number 2. What social movement should listeners become familiar with and why?
That's a tough one because I'll be honest, I am so not into I'm just not into like all of these movements and what they're about and who they are because I'm so embedded in my own work. It almost sounds selfish, but it's really time consuming and I think of the different social movements, I cannot say which one. I mean, the only one that just stands out in my mind, and I promise I would not say this, is Black Lives Matter. And I was speaking with somebody today and they say, oh, everybody knows about Black Lives Matter. I was like, oh, no, they don't. They have an idea of what it is about. But this whole concept, so if they did know, then no one would be saying all lives matter, trans lives matter, what is the one? White lives matter, everybody. Of course, all lives matter. We're not saying that because it's Black Lives Matter and no other lives matter. The concept here is that there are very specific ways in which certain identities or pockets of persons experience oppression. So, yeah, all Black Lives Matter, well, trans lives matter too, because there's a very particular way in which trans people experience. Women's lives matter too, because there's a very specific ways in which women experience oppression. I think there's this whole concept of deconstructing all the ways in which different persons experience oppression is worthy is a place to find agency and to be active and to challenge the status quo. So I would say Black Lives Matter, but even in saying that, I would want people to come to that with a broader understanding of the multiple ways that we live in oppression. We live in a theater of oppression, people. Everyone, each and every single one of us. White people have their own oppression. Black people, Indian people, all sorts of people have. Let us look at the ways in which oppression actually, how we exist in this space of oppression, and how we find resistance, and how we reclaim ourselves. All of us, we're all a very disconnected people. We live in a disconnected world because of where we are. So I would say Black Lives Matter, because that's the only thing that I see as addressing specific oppressions as it occurs in specific spaces. I could be wrong, but that's just me.
No, I think that's a very astute observation. And when it comes to claims to humanity, it seems like some statements as well as movements are worth repeating. So very much so.
Question number 3, Ray. What book is a must-read and why?
Woman at Ground Zero. Woman at Ground Zero. Why? When you have nothing to lose, that's when you have everything to gain, that there's actual power in nothingness. As a woman, a Lebanese woman, Muslim woman, oppressed woman, suffering abuse for so many years, and in the end she kills her husband and goes to jail for life. But in that nothingness of being woman, in realizing that there's nothing I could do in this space, this man's gonna beat me to death anyway, so I'm not gonna have anything. Hey, I actually have agency. I could kill him. I'm not advocating that anybody kill anybody. Just saying that. I could kill him, and in that nothingness, find agency and find power, even if the lock me up for life. Because in any ways, I was already living in jail. That is one book. Salt. Every Trinidadian person, maybe West Indian Caribbean, but every Trinidadian person must read Earl Lovelace Salt. It is the only way we can begin to understand where Afro-Indo and Eurocentric person's knowledge, ideas and constructs, how they collide in this very, very small place, and how we have settled, how we have found a way to settle this whole Afro-Indo Eurocentric way of being, and still find power or negotiate power. We're constantly negotiating power in this space. We have not yet found a nation. This whole idea that we were a republic and what? And we are, what's that from the republic? We are some other kind of nation. I am sorry, Trinidadians are probably going to get angry for this. Rubbish that. It has not yet happened. And Earl Lovelace tells us that we're still trying to negotiate space where we including of trans and queer people, with our various identities and our various experiences of oppression through and slavery, through indentureship, through colonialism. We are such a unique disconnected and at the same time diverse people that we have not yet found that nation. And there's still a lot of space for us to become who we are and be whole people in this nation while we negotiate power and space. And I'll come at the carnival. Carnival tells us how we can do it. Even though I find of recent past, it has become more of it's a way. See, that's why the must read Saul, because here you are, we are losing carnival. It has now become something that is exported for foreigners, and it is for, you can't even buy a costume here now as a Trinidadian person. It's like you have to be making US dollars or
it's living. So expensive.
And this is how we reclaim ourselves. The man didn't eat salt, and that salt is symbolic of something. It is symbolic of the fact that he never lost connection with his ancestors. Whether you're Indian, you're European, or you're African, you never lost that connection with your ancestors. And even if you're in a foreign place, in a diaspora somewhere, that connection matters. It grounds you. You find freedom in that space, regardless of how oppressive it is. And we have eaten salt, and we have gotten too heavy to fly. So now we're losing carnival too. Using carnival to people who don't understand what it is to really, for Juve, that, we see these French people dress up and looking like, what do you call them? Dame Laurence or whatever they call them. And we find it funny and we laugh at it. And so we mock it and we dress up the same way too. Now you want to have dirty mask, you can't fling mud on somebody. You have to act a wine on somebody. And I mean, there's space for these discourses too. But the essence of being in that all identities could actually come into this space and be safe, we are losing that because it's now starting to look pretty and to jump up and down and just look ridiculous and cross the stage and hear your band win, whatever. We've lost it. We've lost it because we eaten the damn salt. Yeah, so salt. Trinidad people need to read salt.
Salt. Gotcha.
Yeah.
A ringing endorsement of reading salt. I mean, it sounds like everyone who's listening to this, probably irrespective of whether they're from Trinidad or not, will be reading salt based upon the way you just described it, Ray. Of course, too, Carnival must be defended from colonial capitalism at all costs as it continues to try to co-opt it. On this, we've got plenty of wonderful homework to do here, Ray. I'm also wondering, in addition to reading, we're going to go into question number 4. And that one is, what film is a must watch or must see, and why?
You know, I thought about this. I went through this whole thing about what's the difference between a film and a movie, and I really don't watch much TV or anything. I just thought about the one show that resonated the most with me, and it's actually a book. You know, it's beloved. That is the one movie that I have seen that I sit down and I this thing about how it's against about trauma, like it becomes a real and tangible thing in a person's life, because that is what the child was. And this is my understanding. I could be wrong because the book was just complicated. Living through and experiencing trauma, the way it goes on, it becomes part of your DNA, part of it is real. And she gave birth to this child that was, the child actually died, but it came back as a spirit and was just there in the shadows again. Thank you for that so much, Levi. And I think about it in terms of as trans people. I think a lot about things in queer terms. How our trauma is so real to us, and it comes back to haunt us, and it ruins our lives. I think in the end, the people came and they helped her exercise the spirit. The importance again of community, even though she was at one point in time, I think if I remember correctly, she was disconnected from the community. They were jealous of her for whatever reason. In the end, the community is what family of origin. Forget it, family of choice. They could save you. Community could save you. Finding each other saves you. We're not. I just love that. I think that's my takeaway, and I would recommend anybody watch Beloved and not be scared by the trauma of the spirit rupture the house and the dog that have the eye for all of that. There's something more there, and the ways in which we carry our trauma throughout our lives and we make it real. And sometimes we need help from the community, from others like ourselves, to silence, to still or calm that hurt, to make peace. Yeah. Love it.
Ray, I'm convinced you need a YouTube channel in which you're reviewing films and books, because if anyone had a book and they wanted people to read it, they should just basically give it to you and say, hey, can you riff on this for 3 minutes? And the whole world would go check it out. No, those are one, and that's a 2-for-1. So listeners, engage with Beloved, both the film and the novel.
Yes. Thank you.
Johanna, number 5, you want to pivot to that one?
Yeah, what song, musician is a must listen, and why?
George Michael, Praying for Time. People, that man was gone too soon, and he was under-celebrated. They haunted that man until he died. That's my personal opinion. But that song, Praying for Time, I am not going to talk about that song. You need to listen to that song. If you need to take your medicinal herbs before you listen to this song, go right ahead and slow it down and just listen to the lyrics of that song.
Okay, so free up yourself, listen to this song, and we're not going to spoil it.
We're not going to spoil it. Praying for Time.
Praying for time. Okay, and then we're going to wrap up here with question number 6. Ray, what artist, poet, thinker, or even creative spirit or soul in general should listeners become familiar with, and why?
My personal Khalil Gibran. I mean, that is like real old school for people. I don't know if it's something that will appeal to younger people. It is so existential, his writings. You cannot read Khalil Gibran. I think he was born in 1883 and died somewhere in 1931. I remember that because he died before the big one. He's a Lebanese poet, artist, author, and who lived mainly in the United States. And his best works, luckily for us, are actually in English. My personal favorite is The Prophet, and he speaks. The concept here is that a prophet is leaving. He was with these people for a very long time, and now his ship is coming and he's leaving. And before he leaves, the people are asking him questions. Tell us about love. Tell us what it means, about what crime and punishment means. And you just have to the prose is so beautiful. I cannot. Khalil Gibran is an experience. It's a feeling when you start to read his prose and you start to think about what it really means to love or to what is punishment and how we look. I remember this, when he spoke about punishment and he said that each of us rise to what is the best amongst all of us. So when you see people do ugly and mean and hurtful things and you demonize them, that person's sick boy, you see how he killed that dog or whatever it is, that is part of humanity. They have done nothing that anybody else is incapable of doing. But yet still we shun and we put away. It's just read it. I recommend The Prophet. Read The Prophet and just experience Khalil Gibran and his proses about living half a life or loving not loving half a lover. Is it? Just read him. Khalil Gibran.
Will do. Levi, I think we need to start a book club and just kind of talk about all these amazing recommendations that we get from our podcast guests. I think that this was a really riveting discussion. Thank you so much, Ray, for your time and being here with us and then sharing so generously with us from your expertise and knowledge pool. Forever indebted. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Surviving Society.
To support our work, you can rate,
review and subscribe. To host or produce a series of Surviving Society,
get in touch with us via Twitter or Instagram.